It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck, and of course that means some smart talk radio is in your future in this segment, no exception. Happy to have our good friend of this show, Tom Keegan. He is the sports editor at the Lawrence Journal-World. He also writes for all kinds of other interesting posts and blogs. He's also, you've heard him on radio many times, and just a all-around decent guy and budding professional golfer, possibly. Tom, how are you, my friend?
Oh, pretty good, Warner. If they have a league where you've got to be at least a 20 handicap, maybe I could get down to a 20 and become a professional. I think that's a good career path for me.
You don't see yourself matching Jim Furyk's 58, huh?
Well, let's put it this way. I played against you once, and I think I was $30 lighter after. But who's counting?
Yeah, who's counting amongst friends? Well, let's do this. Again, we've discussed this a few times, but again, share with our Lewis at Large listeners a little bit. How has your role, do you believe, as sports editor of a daily, how has it changed over the last decade or so? And frame it maybe with what the expectations are of the readers, and also obviously how technology and online publications have changed some of that perspective.
Yeah, I think I'm a non-traditional sports editor, or an old-time sports editor, where the way you used to, sports writers were writing sports editors, and that's the way Chuck Woodling was at the Journal-World, and that's the way I am. But the way it's changed in the last 11 years, let's say, because I came here 11 years ago, KUSports.com and the Journal-World were always a little ahead of the curve in terms of really digital-minded. But even at that, it's changed in terms of when you get something, it goes up immediately because it's a 24/7 news cycle. And so we all know how to put it up immediately. Even I know the technology how to do that. And then you put it up, and then if there's a little typo or something, you go back and get it. So that's the biggest change, I think, that you're constantly spitting out stuff, because yesterday's news it feels like last year's news now with the new news cycle, just the way the immediacy of it all. And it's exciting because, let's face it, journalists all do their best work on deadline anyway, because generally we're procrastinators. If we weren't procrastinators, we would have gone to medical school or law school and made big bucks, but we didn't, and so we like to do things in the spur of the moment, and most of us anyway, I think we're that type of people, and it's made the job harder and I think more rewarding.
With the advent of new media, like what you're talking about, social media and more, do you see more and more younger people attracted to this field, and I'll also include in that newspaper? Do you see aspiring young people wanting to write anymore for dailies or weekly newspapers, for that matter, or is it all electronic and digital for them?
They tend to think of it as electronic, digital, 140 characters at a time, largely Twitter, and then go from there. They learn that first and then go out. And I think an unfortunate trend with young sports writers now is that so many of them think that the way they write is the way ESPN anchors talk. So snarky and, putting that, the humor and the snark before the reporting. And you have to beat that out of them, whether it be at journalism school or after. And they want to write columns right off the bat, when I think in a lot of cases you need to have lived to really have the perspective to write a column. And I think the lack of patience is such that a lot of people want to write a column right off the bat, and it ends up being too shrill, too much screaming, too much like a sports radio talk show caller, not even a host, a caller.
So it's less about the facts and more about opinion and perspective is what you're saying.
I think so, and you've got to, and that's backwards because you've got to start with the facts, and then uncover them as well as you can, and report as well as you can, so that your opinion is not only more informed but has more depth. Because the more you find out, the more you have opinions on each thing that you find out. Where anybody can just sit on the couch and fly off the handle about any little thing immediately, but I think the more you report it out and try to see it through as many eyes as you can see it through, the more compelling a column you're going to write.
If you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. In this segment, a good friend of the show, Tom Keegan, sports editor at the Lawrence Journal-World, now 11 years and counting. And Tom, what about, let's look at it from a different perspective. Have the expectations of those that you interview, coaches, possibly other people in the sports media, athletes, etc., have their expectations and how they use or not use a sports writer, has that changed over the last decade?
That's a good question. I think that the more money there's, particularly in professional sports, but also in college sports, the more money that comes into athletics, the more guarded everyone is, and the more they try to push you away from finding out what's going on, from interviewing them. But then when you get your one-on-one interviews with athletes, you find that athletes really haven't changed that much, and that they're impressive people by and large, really impressive people, because they're successful, they're driven, they're smart, and they're interesting, or else they wouldn't have gotten to the point where they're worth interviewing. Because in order to be good enough to get a Division I scholarship, first of all, you have to be physically gifted, but you also have to battle adversity along the way. I don't care who you are. And you've got to have a toughness to you to get to Kansas, a place like Kansas, whether it be football, basketball, baseball, anything. So it's kind of unfortunate that so many roadblocks are put in front of you before you interview people, because in the end, 9 out of 10 of these guys are great advocates for their program, for their university, and for their peers. And so many of these guys are just winners. They're winners. And I don't know why you want to put up roadblocks to people who want to expose their personalities, and because they are winners 9 times out of 10.
Tom, what about as we can't talk to you in the middle of the summer without at least mentioning the Kansas City Royals? Let's talk about them again. 2014, they go to the series. 15, they win it, and now we're in 16 and mired in a little bit of a struggle here. What's your overall, just from a 100,000-foot view, what's your overall take on the Royals this year, and how do you see them finishing out?
Well, Dayton Moore did an unbelievable job of assembling a team that made back-to-back World Series, came 90 feet away from winning the first and won the second. But in order to do that, he had to pay the price of giving up young pitching. And a lot of that young pitching and even some young hitting is blossoming now. But it was well worth the price. But this is what you're paying for now. And it leaves them in a tough pickle because some of their top pitching prospects have had arm injuries, and so now they're in a down cycle there. And I don't see them having enough pitching to get into the playoffs this year. I hope they can keep the nucleus together and somehow get some pitching, whether there's a surprise or two in the minor leagues. And if that's part of it, or maybe you make a clever trade. The pieces to trade have gone down, but when you've got a team that has such a great defense and once healthy, such a great bullpen, that's a pretty good starting point. So hopefully they can cobble something together for next year. This year would take a miracle, I think.
Do you think, when you said cobble something together, is it realistic? Should fans be looking towards a postseason appearance next year with the Royals, or just too early to tell?
This year or next year?
Next year.
Next year? Yeah, if they can do something to improve that starting rotation, and it's not easy. There are no easy answers because they don't have their bargaining chips anymore. And, free agent starting pitchers, just look how much Ian Kennedy costs. They just are so expensive. It's a tough route to go. But, you got to spend money to make money, so maybe they can do something there.
What about, again, we won't stay too long on this one, but I would like your thoughts on A-Rod's retirement that actually happened this week. A long, successful career, obviously, and I know you spent some time back in New York, and I'm just curious what you think that market is and what his contribution ultimately will be. How will history treat him?
I think it'll be mixed, like a lot of guys from the steroid era. And I will vote for Alex because before he did steroids, he was a Hall of Fame ball player. And I vote for Clemens and I vote for Bonds, but I don't vote for Sosa because it seems to me he was a hyper respondent to steroids, and that's the way I do it. I try to figure out what would they be like. It's an educated guess, but the Hall of Fame ballot it's not a court of law; it's a court of opinion. So you do your best job at trying to make an educated guess and talk to a lot of people. How would these guys be with steroids and without? And in A-Rod's case, I think I've always felt a little sorry for A-Rod that he was so exceptional, so young, that the handlers knew they had something really, really mind-blowing here. So they seized his mind, kidnapped his mind, and made him all about image at a very, very young age before his personality was formed. And as a result, Alex doesn't really have a personality. His personality is image consciousness. And when you kidnap a personality that young, before a young man can sow his wild oats, it's going to be a tough way to go through life because you have to sow your wild oats. So maybe he sows them a little at a time and then has this public image that's impossible to live up to, the way Tiger Woods had a public image that was impossible for anyone to live up to. And I think the people, those image shapers who do that to these guys, who try to make their image and their personality as perfect as their games, are doing them a great disservice because that's too much to ask. Who's perfect? Life is not a game of perfect. So just because they're as close to perfect in their professions as anybody ever has been, well, it doesn't mean that they then would be as close to perfect behavior-wise. So why create those unrealistic expectations? I think athletes should be very, very leery of image shapers. They really should.
Well, again, if you just joined us, we're talking to Tom Keegan, and he is the talented sports editor of the Lawrence Journal-World. He's also, you see him on The Drive. You also have read him in many other posts. Tom, what about, let's do a little prognostication here. A lot of people think the Chiefs this year, this might be a great year for them. Do you see them making a big leap forward?
Well, is the linebacker going to be healthy at any point during the season? Will his knee be recovered enough to where Houston, where he can join the team in midseason? That'd be a big boost, but that's a question mark. Who knows? Eric Berry's holding out, big deal. He'll sign. He'll come to camp. That doesn't worry me. I think Alex Smith is a solid quarterback. You don't have to have a, quote, Super Bowl quarterback to get to the Super Bowl. Not everybody's Joe Montana. So I think he's good enough. But, just the fact that they won 11 in a row doesn't mean they're going to just come out of the gates and win 11 in a row. And again, they also went 1-5 at the beginning. So which do you take out of it? The schedule will be tougher. So if I had to bet him, I'd bet against it, but it wouldn't totally shock me.
All right, let's move to KU here. Let's talk a little KU football here again. Winless last year, Beatty's second season as head coach. Where do you see improving? And again, I'm not really going to ask you to predict their record, but give us an overall sense of what you see going forward.
Well, since you didn't ask, I'll say 2-10.
Okay.
But so many of the improvements are making them closer to being competitive. It doesn't mean they're competitive. They're faster, bigger, and stronger in the weight room, but they are still shy of experienced depth, particularly at the offensive line spot. I mean, think about Nebraska and schools like that, and any number of schools, Oklahoma, and on and on. they're starting fourth and fifth year linemen for the most part, offensive linemen. That means they've been building muscles for 4 and 5 years. There are only 2 offensive linemen on that entire roster who've been in the program 4 and 5 years. Joe Gibson is a fourth-year junior. Jordan Shelley-Smith is a fifth-year senior, but he didn't join the offensive line until his second or third year in the program. So right there you're looking at, I think it was his second year, but right there you're looking at only 2 guys out of all those linemen. So are they better than last year on the offensive line when they had to start 2 true freshmen at tackles at times? I mean, 2 true freshmen, Larry Hughes and Clyde McCauley, started a combined 12 games at offensive tackle. That just doesn't happen. They weren't strong enough, and it showed, is what Janae Jackson said. A quote in the paper earlier this week that I had, he's right. They weren't ready, and it showed. They weren't strong enough. So will they be better? Yes. Good enough to give Ryan Willis time to throw the ball downfield to Quivante Gonzalez, LaQuiviante Gonzalez? We'll see. But they will be better, and it'll be easier to watch than a year ago.
What about, and again, simply in the interest of time, let's move on to basketball. What about the KU women's team? Again, second-year coach, and you've got, I believe, if my memory serves me right, they won some games, but they were winless in the Big 12, were they not?
I thought they won one game, maybe in the Big 12 tournament.
All right.
Maybe it was the Big 12 tournament, though. But I think he's a good coach. He has 2 transfers, one from North Carolina, one from USC. That should help a lot. It's going to take a little while. You need more than that. He needs to recruit a big. Remember the Carolyn Davis and after that Chelsea Gardner. That gave them a run of like 7 years of quality bigs, quality post players. They need to get someone in that vein. And but I think this guy's a good coach. He will get them going. He did a great job at Stephen F. Austin. He won a national title at Emporia State. Brandon Schneider was a good hire, and they'll be better than they were a year ago. And the question a year ago was, who had the worst offense in all of sports? Was it the Kansas football team or was it the Kansas women's basketball team? And that'll be discussed for centuries. And I don't know that anyone can come up with a definitive answer. But I do think they'll put more points on the board and put a more exciting product out there this year.
Well, Tom, what about the KU men's hoops team? It looks like they are awfully loaded. Again, we've said that many, many times, but what's your sense of how the Hawks will do this year on the hardwood?
I think they'll do real well because they've got that experienced championship pedigree the backcourt, and that's a great place to start it always, and with Mason and Graham. And then Josh Jackson's a defensive-minded, driven guy. He's a better ball handler than Andrew Wiggins was. So that's good, too. You can clear it out for him, and he'll drive to the hoop. He doesn't need to get fouled. He'll finish. So, and then inside they got Azubuike is a freshman reserve. May have trouble running the floor initially, but he is a power player. He will have Thomas Robinson-type dunks. And Landon Lucas, great rebounder. So they have 8 or 9 guys, probably a 9-man rotation that you can spot right now, and you see no weaknesses as long as everybody stays healthy.
Yeah, indeed. Listen, we know we're starting to wind down here a little bit. I know you've got some other commitments. We do want to touch briefly, of course, on Lawrence High and Free State, though. Let's talk about both high school football teams. What do you see there?
Well, it'd be interesting to see how Janae Jackson's son makes the transition. Janae Jackson, the strength and conditioning coach at Kansas, makes the transition to quarterback. He's an outstanding defensive back, and he'll be playing quarterback this year. Great runner, very quick, hard to touch, much less tackle. And also, what's interesting about Lawrence High this year, Dirk Wade is committed to platooning players, not playing guys both ways. In certain packages, third down, short yardage, he'll play some guys both ways. But for the most part, he's committed to 2 different platoons, which I think will help keep more kids in the program because they will see that they are, instead of being 4th string, they're now 2nd string and maybe a year away from starting. That'll keep kids coming back, and the numbers will be good. Free State, they're always right there. Every year they've really built something, and they have the transfer quarterback from Topeka, who I've heard good things about. I love high school football, and I love it in Lawrence because there's big crowds at those games, and those stadiums on campus are awesome. I'm glad we don't have a big antiseptic county stadium. You know, those were brilliant. I love both of those stadiums. They're really well done.
Tom, what about take a quick look, if you would, at the boys and girls hoops teams for both schools, too?
Well, you got Madison Piper back, is outstanding for Free State, and then you've got Chisholm in the pivot for Lawrence High. Lawrence High girls basketball is going to be a powerhouse for the next 3 years. They had a terrific freshman class last year. And that's really the one program I think is going to be the most exciting in all of Lawrence is that girls basketball program at Lawrence High. Keep an eye out on that.
Well, we appreciate your time. Tom Keegan, again, sports editor for the Lawrence Journal-World, and has been there now, my gosh, 11 years. And, hey, I do have one quick question for you.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to author? I know you've released books before. What about a new book for you? Where's all that?
You know, I don't have one right now, but
how about your autobiography?
You know what? That would be titled "Alone in a Crowded Room," because I like to go to parties and then just sit in the corner and watch, and make myself invisible. But another book, if I'm successful in my quest to get down to 200 pounds for the first time in decades, I'm going to approach my doctor, Dr. Sandel, who's an integrative medicine doctor. That's someone who has formal training, and like all doctors have at medical school, then goes back and studies Eastern medicine and then researches and melds the two. I've been going to him, and I've lost 35 pounds, and we continue on that path, and I continue to respond to his advice. I may do a book on integrative medicine because of what it's doing for me and what I hope it ultimately does for me.
Oh, great. Well, listen, thanks so much. Know you got to run here again. Tom Keegan, sports editor at Lawrence Journal-World. Tom, thanks so much. We'll have you on again soon.
All right. Thank you, Warner.
All right. Take care. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large. You love your dog and you love your yard, but sometimes what your dog leaves behind can make you not love your yard so much. Well, when that happens, it's Call of Duty Pet Waste Removal Service to the rescue. Large or small dogs, big yard or small, call Call of Duty. They clean up the mess your dog leaves behind. So if you're tired of cleaning pet waste from your yard, call Call of Duty, 764-7224. That's 764-7224. Prompt, effective, courteous services on the way. Your yard is left clean and waste-free. So don't waste any more time on waste. Call Call of Duty in Lawrence, 764-7224. That's 764-7224. Or visit their website, callofduty2010.web.com.